All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. So glad you can join us today as we start our grant writing program class. My name is Nathan Stokes. I am the business librarian from the Houston Public Library, and welcome to our grant writing class entitled Learn How to Write Winning Grant Narratives. Today, we'll give you the tools that'll help your grant proposals get noticed and clear guidance on what it takes to craft a winning proposal. Before we get started, I wanted to share my screen here, and I will take you to one of the Houston Public Library uh, resources that we do have concerning grant writing and how we can look up grants. If you go to the Houston Public Library, any Houston Public Library, you will be able to access this resource on our library webpage. Before it was just at Central, but now it is here. It's there for every Houston Public Library location. If you try to access this type of resource at home, it will ask you to sign in, and I believe there's going to be a monthly fee for it. So at the Houston Public Library, you can access it for free. And so we want you to come into the library and go to this resource that will help you for this class. You'll learn how to write grant proposals, and then you'll be writing a grant proposal to one of these organizations to get noticed, hopefully to have a grant for you. So if everybody can see my screen here, this is our home page for the Houston Public Library. And when you get a chance to visit one of our locations, I will help you to find a resource to find grants. So if you go to the Houston Public Library's webpage and you'll go to research and you go to the A to Z databases, if you click there, it's a drop down menu. And just scroll down a little bit here. And right here where it says database and title, if you just type in Candid, Candid, you will see three databases found for looking up grants here. So we have the Foundation Directory, and we also have at the last one, GuideStar. The middle one, Grants to Individual, that combined with the Foundation Directory. So it's basically, you see three here, but it's basically two. It's Foundation Directory, Professional, and the GuideStar. And what you would do here is if you click on the Foundation Directory, it'll take you to this page. And if you would type the subject matter of um, your grant or what you're doing for your business. So let's just say agriculture. If your business is centered around agriculture, you would do a search here. And as you would go to the search and drop down, this is going to be a very brief training here. If you would like uh, to have a one-on-one consultation with this website, you can always call here at the library, 832-393-1313, or you can use my email, which I will type in the chat, and you can schedule a consultation with me directly, and we'll set up a time. But very quickly for this resource here, you'll see the grant makers here. And if you click on one of the grant makers for the agriculture, you will see information about the particular organization, what is being funded. So in agriculture, they're giving away grants more to the things that's centered around health and education. And if you go down further down, you'll see more information concerning about the grant, how to apply, the financials, and etc. So it's a very good resource to have if you're looking for organizations to for grants to your particular business for this thing and to apply, and you may get a grant. That would be great. All right. Without further ado, we're going to introduce our speakers for today to talk to us about getting notice for a proposal for grants. This is going to be our directory. So I want to introduce our presenters who will be presenting today. First, we have Miranda Morris, who is a grant writer here for the Houston Public Library. And we also have Patrina Pelton Smith, who is a principal consultant, CEO, and the Business of Charity, LLC. And so they will give us our knowledge today. So lend your ears. And without further ado, I will give you to Miranda.
Hello, everyone. It's really nice to see you here today. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to share my screen so that we have our presentation going. I say I'm going to share my screen. There it goes. All right, let me know when you can see that, Patrina. You can see it?
Perfect.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Awesome. All right, so today, Patrina and I are going to talk to you about grant proposal basics, learning how to write winning grant narratives. Of course, we can't guarantee your narrative is going to win. There are so many variables when it comes to writing a grant proposal and having that proposal selected, but we are going to give you some great tips and tools to strengthen your proposal. If you're new to grant writing, this will be a great overview for you on what is needed. If you have been submitting proposals or have written a few grants already, this will be a great way to sort of support and strengthen what you're already doing to make those even better. So let's go to the next one. I say let's go to the next. There we go. Yeah. So technology. Yes. So as you know, we're the Houston Public Library, and we link you to the world. So we are a wealth of knowledge, as Nathan mentioned. If you want to come in and meet with him and learn how to use the Candid directory, he can meet with you one-on-one. You'll just need to schedule an appointment for that. But the library is also a great place to research for your grant proposals or for any type of work that you're looking to do, nonprofit work or small business. We have a lot of resources here. So come by, check out the website, see what we have available, and we will love to help you. Patrina and I know each other through the Grant Professional Association. We're both members. This is a national organization for grant professionals. It is not a grant-making organization, but what GPA does is it provides trainings and resources for people who are working and or applying to grants. So if you are applying to grants regularly, you may want to check out the organization and see what kind of resources they have. We also have a local chapter here in Houston, the Southeast Texas chapter. We do have monthly trainings and monthly meetings. We do open those up to the public at times. I have put the website for both organizations, the local chapter and the national, on this slide, which I will send everyone copies of the slides once we're done today. And you can check out the websites and see what's coming up. feel free to join us for a meeting, and it's a great opportunity to learn more about grants, also meet some people who are working in the grant profession here in Houston, and ask them questions. So, Petrina, do you have anything to add about GPA?
Yes. So GPA also has a credentialing institute, GPCI, or Grant Professional Certified Institute. And so you can also receive a certification. Right now, there are only 500 people, just a few over 500, that have that certification, of which Miranda and I both have achieved that status. And so it's a great way to also check out their website. You can see who has that credentialing, as well as get access to other consultants who you may be interested in communicating with or connecting with if you're looking for someone to write those grants for you. So the website has some really great information that will give you access to resources both here and across the US and Canada.
Awesome. Thank you, Petrina. So I'm going to turn this over to Petrina. What is a grant?
What is a grant? So I'm just curious if you all will drop in the chat where you're from and what you're hoping to gain from today's presentation. We're going to cover a lot of material in the next 2 hours, so I'm just curious. And so me being nosy, I'm going to ask you to drop that in the chat. But what is a grant? So essentially, a grant is a methodology, a way, and sometimes even a process for you to obtain funding from a third party, whether that is through the local government, whether that is through the state government, the federal government, a private foundation, as well as a corporate foundation. And even just potential donors can give you a grant per se. And so when you are thinking about accessing funding, a grant is just one vehicle for you to fund a nonprofit or a for-profit entity. So we talked about the types of grants that are out there: government, federal, state, and local, as well as corporate and private foundations. All of them offer some type of grant, and they're also underneath even these types are different types, whether that's an operation grant, whether that is a program grant, whether that's a capital grant. And so depending on the type of organization and the type of grant that you're seeking, you may use a combination of all of these types of grants to be able to fulfill the mission of your organization. So when you're looking at the grant life cycle, and we're going to focus on, you see that there are 3 cycles here. Today, we're going to focus on the pre-award stage, but there's also the award stage and then the post-award stage. Now, I'm going to be frank. Everybody wants to celebrate when you get to that award stage, but there's so much work, as you can see in the pre-award cycle, that goes into this process that before you get there, you should have all your foundation in place, and a few other things that we will mention here or there today. We're not going to really do a deep dive into grant readiness, but always recommend that your organization be grant ready before you start seeking grants. Otherwise, you're going to be frustrated when you're not getting grants that you're looking for. And sometimes it's not the funder that's the issue. Sometimes it's the organization, because funders can read in the application whether or not you're ready for a grant based upon the language that you're using. And so it's really important to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row, your foundation in place before you jump into seeking grants. But once you do, we're going to talk about this. What is your project? How are you going to fund it? Because we talked about the different types of grants. And so how are you going to identify who will fund your project and your mission? Then you're going to develop your proposal. So you want to make sure you understand the RFP. We're going to spend some time there today, really talking about that. What are the grant attachments that go with your application? And there are just some standard attachments like your IRS determination letter, potentially your 990 financial statements, if audited financial statements, if you have an audit completed. So those are things that funders will ask for on a regular basis. And then there's some other components that you want to consider that you want to include in your proposal. And we'll talk about what those look like, and then submitting them and who's going to submit them. And what does that process look like? Is it a two-step process? Is it a single process? Do you need more than one person to participate in the process? All of those are questions that we will answer for you today. And then we are not going to talk about the post-award stage other than in passing today, but there is a whole process, and we could do, and we did last year, matter of fact, a whole series of presentations around managing your grant, reporting, and closing out grants. So the award stage is the fun stage, but there's so much work before you ever get there.
So let's say you've been looking and you found a grant, a notice that looks like it fits your project, but doesn't really fit your needs. So now we're going to go through the RFP and understand a little bit more about how to decipher if this opportunity fits the project that you are looking to fund.
So the RFP, and we're using RFP kind of as a generic catch-all phrase, but really it could be any of these that you see on the screen. It could be a NOFO, a NOFA, a SGA, a RFF, and all of those have different meanings to the funder, depending on what it is that they're seeking. So a NOFA is more likely to be a grant opportunity that is out there, it's competitive, it's open for the public, in accordance with the eligibility guidelines. We'll talk about those in a few minutes, but you want to make sure you're eligible before you start applying. But that means that generally there's an opportunity open. A NOFA usually means it's an announcement. That announcement may or may not be open at that very moment. It may also be an announcement of funding that is to come, but they're putting those guidelines out there so that you'll have advance notice of it. A NOFA is actually pretty nice because it means that you usually know the end point, the starting point and the end point, and then you can plan for that, versus sometimes with a NOFO, it's open. You find out about it in the middle of it. So let's say you had a 60-day process, and that was before the grant guidelines shortened to a 2-week window. So as of this year, most grants now have a 2-week window that you have to submit it under the new administration. Before, you might have 60 days to submit an application, sometimes longer, depending on the funder. And so with that being the case, you have more time to prepare. So that's why a NOFO versus a NOFA, sometimes it was better to have a NOFA. And then solicitation for grant applications, sometimes that means, unfortunately, that the application is just that. It's kind of a screening tool to see what they're going to get versus it's an actual program that they're going to submit funding for. They take a peek based upon your application and then make a determination if they're going to issue funding for it. And then a request for funding is you submitting an application for funding based upon the application. Sometimes that's usually a special project. You're mostly going to see NOFAs and NOFOs versus an RFF and an SGA, but they do happen. And so the important key thing is whatever approach that they're using with it, make sure you look at your eligibility guidelines to make sure that it's an appropriate fit for you. And so the components you definitely want to make sure you look at is what's your deadline? We just talked about that piece of it, especially now that we know that it is a 2-week window for most applications. I'll be frank, there's a grant that I normally write in December that it opens in December and closed in February. I'm interested to see what will happen with it this year, because I will tell you that I usually need a good solid 30 days. So look at your deadlines to make sure what time zone it is in, particularly if it's a federal grant. Those are usually closing on an Eastern time zone. And that happens for even private foundations and corporate foundations. So make sure you're looking at it and thinking, not thinking it says 10 p.m. And that's really 9 p.m. Central Time because you're in the wrong time zone. And then you want to make sure, are there any grant conferences or pre-application requirements? If it's an LOI, do you need to submit that first? Do you need to give them notice that you're planning to even submit an application? Because some grants will require that. The HUD, Local Continuum of Care, just closed out one in July that they said, if you don't give us notice by July 31st by sending an LOI to us that you intend to apply for funding when it opens up next year, you cannot apply. And that's some of the, unfortunately, requirements of different grants. And then sometimes with government grants, they will have a mandatory grant conference. And if you don't attend that grant conference, you can apply for the grant, but you will not be considered for it because you did not attend. And so read your qualifications to see what are required for you prior to submitting the grant. Other things that may be, you have to open up a grant portal. Maybe you have to open up an account with the grant.gov. Maybe you have to open up one with Just Grants, which is a different grant portal. If you're applying through the SAMHSA, which is your drugs and mental health program, that's a different portal. And all of those portals take time for you to open them up, sometimes as much as 6 weeks. And so you need to make sure that you have that in place. The other thing to remember is that if you're applying for a federal grant, then you need to also be registered with SAM.gov, System for Award Management. And so if you're not registered in all these different places and you're trying to do that in consecutive to applying for the grant, you may not be able to complete all your tasks before the grant deadline. And depending on the funder, some will tell you that everything has to be submitted prior to submission of the grant. Others will tell you it's okay, you can go ahead and work on these things while you have submitted the grant and then complete it after. So you have to make sure that you're look at the RFP to make sure what is accessible and also allowable for that funder. And then what are the minimum and maximum amounts of funding, and when will it be released? When is the grant start timeline? So when is your project date? Does it is it a federal project where it begins October 1 and ends September 30th generally? Or is it a state timeline, a city timeline? You want to make sure that you also know that. And then look at what are the reporting requirements, because generally in your RFP, it will also give you that information as to what's required. How often do you have to report? Is it going to be quarterly, monthly? Is it going to be a semi-annual or an annual report? And oftentimes they will also give you a copy of the report, particularly more sort of private foundations, government grants, but not always. Sometimes they will just give you those guidelines without giving you a report. And so the other thing to know is, are there trainings that you have to attend as part of your application? So you make sure that you not only factor that into your calendar, but into the grant budget. Do you have to have a partnership with another organization? Several grants have come out now where they require collaboration, sometimes with 3 to 5 different other organizations. And that means that you also have to have some type of documentation of that partnership. So whether that's an MOU or some other agreement of partnership, you want to make sure that you have those signed in advance of the grant as much as possible, or during the grant process. So sometimes that may mean you need a team to really be effective and help you do these things. And then we talked about who's going to sign the application. Is it going to be the CEO, the ED, the board chair, the grant manager, an elected official? Some of that may be driven by the funder themselves, because they may require an application also have the signature from your board, or a resolution, depending on the funder. They may want to see that the board has actually voted on it. I recommend that you do have your board vote on any grant applications that you are submitting out there. They should be aware of it, as well as the eligibility and the requirements for it. That way it doesn't catch them by surprise. And then what other supporting documents are needed? Because sometimes we talked about some of those basic documents like the IRS determination letter, potentially a W-9, a board roster, bylaws, definitely your budgets and your financials, but sometimes they may say, well, we also want a logic model. And so if you do not already have a logic model in place, or if there's not a template within the grant application itself for you to complete a logic model, then this process may take even longer. And so you want to also know, what do you need that needs to be submitted with your application?
So now you have found this grant, reviewed the RFP. After going through everything that Patrina just mentioned, you've decided that this is a really great fit for your project and that you're going to apply for it. So now we are going to talk about a few of the proposal components and some standard grant attachments that you would put into that proposal when you submit. Ooh. So there are 6 basic proposal components. The executive summary, which is a statement of the case and summary for your entire proposal. I personally like to write these last because once you have your whole proposal together, it's easy to pull information from that and write your executive summary. There's the need statement, which is basically why the project is needed. And we're going to go into these in more detail pretty soon. And there's the project description, which talks about the project details, the plan that you have in place to implement that project, and then how it's going to be carried out. Your budget, which is the financial description for the project, but also includes all the itemized expenses. The organization information, which is something that all organizations should have handy. This is the history and governing structure of the nonprofit, so it could contain information like about your primary activities, about the audience that you serve, about your board of directors. And then, of course, the conclusion, which is the summary of all of your proposal's main parts, but will also include a sustainability plan, because a lot of funders now want to see how you plan to sustain this project beyond their funding. And we will go into each of these. So talking about the executive summary, personally, yeah, go ahead, Patrina.
So I was going to say the executive summary, we always talk about it being at the beginning of the grant application, but as Miranda just stated, we usually write it at the end. And to be frank, it's easier because you've already laid out everything that you're answering here in your grant application. And so now you can take that information, summarize it, and include it in your executive summary. So the problem statement has been addressed in your narrative. And so now you're going to take 1 or 2 sentences from it. You're going to talk about your project description as part of the solution. And you're going to talk about what you will do as part of this, and then how many you will serve, because you always want to include that information as part of your executive summary. This grant will serve 100 people, providing XYZ for them, whatever it is that is in alignment to the mission of the organization. And you're going to tell them how much money you're requesting. And if it's more than what they are giving, then you're going to also talk about how you're going to make up the difference, what the gap in funding, how it's going to be addressed. And also sustainability, we're going to talk about that because the other question that is now in, I think, 99% of grant applications is, well, what happens if you can't get or receive all of the money? What if we can only give you some of the money? What will you do with this project? How will you manage it? Are you going to scale it down? Will you not be able to do it at all? What's your plan? And so you will talk about that as part of your project. And then your budget, because you always want to talk about how much you're asking for and what it will pay for. So you're going to talk about whether that's personnel, whether that's travel and training, whether that's supplies, direct cost, and then indirect costs. So those are all categories that if you're asking for funding in those areas, you want to include that in your executive summary. And then make sure to include a statement about your organization, about who they are, why you came to be, and then your capacity to carry out this project. Because oftentimes they are looking at capacity first to make a determination as to whether or not you will receive funding. Because you can have a great idea, but if it's only one person that you're talking about executing, serving that 100 people, they may question how you're going to actually complete that. Make sure you stay within any guidelines in terms of page limits or font sizes, and we'll talk more about that. But for the executive summary, I will tell you my struggle usually is to get it in that one page, because there's always that one sentence. I'm trying to include too much information and to make it all round out that wants to trail over to page 2. And if they say that they will only read one page, anything on page 2 will not be read and considered. So make sure you're staying in your guidelines for your page limits.
And I know some executive summaries, especially when they are always at the beginning of your application, but sometimes they'll even give you like 500 words or 500 characters to do your executive summary. So you're basically taking a summary of this entire project and proposal and squeezing it down into these very, very limited amounts of space. So definitely doing the executive summary at the end makes it so much easier, because it is going to be a 1 page or less generally.
You're right, or less. Never longer, less.
Never longer. So the needs statement. Patrina, do you want to take the needs statement?
Sure, because I am a stats girl. I grew up writing my needs around what I needed to support. And so with that being the case, I usually talk about what it is that we're trying to do, what's the issue, what's the problem, and then I talk about the stats around that issue or problem. So one of the key things that you always want to highlight is using the right data for your grant. So if you're writing a national grant, national stats are very appropriate. But if you're using or writing for a specific region or even city or zip code, then you want to make sure your stats are in alignment with that. And if you can't find stats that are specific to what you're writing or the area you're writing about, then make sure you talk about that, because maybe you need to use anecdotal data to describe the issue or the problem that you're attempting to solve versus using national, local, state stats. Make sure you cite your sources, because they don't want to, and if it's anecdotal, just say that this is anecdotal data, but otherwise cite your cite your sources. No, I want to cite your stats, but cite your sources. Creating a bibliography using MLA or APA citation style. And then you can also include that as an attachment to your proposal, and or write them in a footnote or place them within the data itself by using parentheses. So you want to make sure that you include that. This is also a great place to talk about actual client stories. Now, obviously, you don't want to use any personal information. I use that age-old adage of, client name changed to protect confidentiality. But if you don't have enough space to do that, don't waste words on that. Just simply talk about the client in the third party format, so that way you can share their story and help highlight why it's important that you do this work, and then also why it's important for you to receive funding for the work. And also make sure you warn the client that you're going to share their story. Now, you can do this in a couple of ways. I know some organizations do this at the very beginning as part of their intake process. They have clients sign off on waivers, and then they come back and tell them that they're going to share that information. Or if you have not done it at that point at the beginning, always before you submit the grant, if you're going to use any type of information that would specifically identify that client, not by name, but by situation. So let's say they read their own story and they go, that sounds like me. You definitely have wanted to have that conversation with them before. So make sure that during this section, you outline it so that it's clear enough that the potential funder recognizes how they can support you in the process. But at the same time, also make it personal enough that they can say they have a heart to want to also support you in completing the work that you're doing.
So project description, this is basically an outline of the goals and objectives that you're looking to accomplish with this project. So you most likely will be using your SMART goals. If you haven't heard of SMART goals before, those are goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So giving some examples here, if you are saying your goal is that our after-school program will improve youth literacy, we want to improve on that. So using our SMART goals, we'll say that our after-school youth literacy program will improve reading scores for 50 youth by 1 grade level. So that's specific, right? As demonstrated on standardized reading test, measurable, administered after 6 months. So that's timely. So this is expanding on your goals, your overall goal, and showing the funder that you have thought through exactly how many people you have participating in your project, exactly how you're going to measure whether that project is a success, and what time bounds you have for that project. Most of your projects will probably be limited based on the grant. If you've got a grant, if it's a specific project and you've got a grant for 1 year, you are going to be measuring your data, measuring the outcomes of that project within that 1 year granting period, because that is what the funder is going to want to see at the end of the grant. They're going to want to see exactly what you accomplished during the time that you had the funding from them. You also want to talk in the project description about the methods that you're going to use to achieve these goals and objectives. So the methods are basically the activities. So if you are doing this after school program, your activities, what sort of lesson plans will you be giving these 50 students to help them with their reading scores? Will you be providing books to them? Will you be expanding on your library? Are there reading will you have like reading times where everybody sits and reads together? Will you be hiring instructors to help with the reading activities? So the methods section will describe the specific activities, and you really want to talk about the how, the when, the why, the where of the project to give them a better understanding of exactly how you're going to lay this project out. When it comes to project descriptions, I try to be as specific as possible, down to even talking about, like, if we have specific staff working on certain sections of a project, I'll talk about not the staff name, but the title. I'll mention that the project manager will be responsible for XYZ portions of this project, and this is how and why they will be managing this portion of the project. Meanwhile, the project coordinator will be working on this section of the project and give them, maybe this part of the project happens for 3 months. So the project coordinator will be responsible for the first 3 months of the project for XYZ parts of the project. It's really a great time to sort of break down exactly what you're doing so that they get a good idea of, okay, if we give funding for this year, we can see from the beginning of the year that they received the funding, exactly what they're going to do with that project. And by the end of that year, exactly what they had planned to accomplish. And so we are not going into reporting today, but if we were talking about managing this grant, this is part of what you would be doing to manage this grant. Everything you put in your project description, your goals, your objectives, your methods, this is the information you would want to track if you receive this grant to report back to the grantor. Did you accomplish your goals? Did you actually get 50 youth to increase their reading by 1 grade level, and how did you measure that? And so that would be what you would report back to them. So it's very important, whatever you put in your project description, that you adhere to this, because this is, in a way, your proposals are almost like a contract to the grantor. So you're telling them, this is what we're going to do with the funding if you give us this funding, and you should stick to it, because if they approve this proposal, then they are expecting you to stick to what you said you would do in the proposal. If anything needs to change, then that's a whole different training.
Definitely.
The conversations need to be had with the funder, because one thing you have to keep in mind with grants, this isn't your money. It's not free money. It's not your money to do what you want with it. It's their money that they are giving you. They're basically investing in your project to accomplish what you say you're going to do in this proposal. So it's their money. It's their investment in your organization, in your project. And so if you don't do what you say you're going to do, there could be implications with that later on down the line, because there's a lot of rules about doing things with the grant funds because they are not technically your money.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so project description, just keep in mind, whatever you say you're going to do in this is what you need to be doing. I'm moving to the next one. So project description continued. We talked about timeline. You want to make sure that you describe the anticipated timeline. I like to put timelines into, depending on the length of the grant. If it's a year, I'll maybe sometimes lay it out by month. It can be a bit general because grantors also understand that timelines can change based on maybe there's a delay in getting supplies delivered. So I kind of keep things in general, but I'll say, okay, in January, we're going to put in the procurement request for our supply purchases. February, supplies will come in and those will be distributed to locations. March, the staff will be working on classroom activities with those supplies. So I kind of break it down by month. If it's a multi-year grant, 2 or more years, I'll sometimes break it down by the quarter in that year. So the first quarter, January through March, second quarter, April through June, and so on and so forth, all the way through the year, with anticipated activities that would be happening during that time. Now we have this here listed in project description. Sometimes in applications, they'll ask for a timeline outside of the project description section, but just know, like, if you're thinking ahead as you're putting your proposals together, that you're going to need to have a timeline. Whether they ask for it or not, it's always good to have. The project description area is a great place to put it. You do want to talk about your staffing. So again, you don't have to be specific with names, but sometimes they do want to see who on staff will be working or dedicating time to that project or that activity, maybe how much time they'll be dedicating to it, and what is their background. They want to see that they're qualified. Now, for federal grants, sometimes they will actually ask for resumes or biographies of people who will be working on these projects. Not so much for foundation grants or smaller grant applications, but it's still good to kind of give them an idea that you're going to have 3 staff members working on this 20 hours a week, just so that they can see that you have an investment in this project as well. And then, of course, this is a great place to talk about your evaluation practices, how you're going to evaluate that you're meeting those goals and objectives, that your method to get to those goals and objectives was working, or maybe it didn't work. And don't lie if it didn't. If it didn't work, when you go to do your reporting, your evaluation showed that maybe this wasn't as successful as possible. Be honest about that. The grantors want to see that you're honest with that, and give them an opportunity. Tell them how you're going to fix it for the next time. What did you learn from this project that you can make it better the next time you do it? Because sometimes we are successful and sometimes things are not successful, and there's a lot of variables and things that can happen in between, right? Right, Patrina? Absolutely. Do you have anything to add?
Absolutely. That was a great example. During COVID, there was an organization that was going to offer education around COVID vaccines to marginalized communities. And they thought that it was going to be easy peasy, and it wasn't. Despite all their lovely incentives, they had televisions, they had food, they had tons of things that should have attracted the community and did attract the community in other times, but did not work for this particular area. So they had to go back to the funder and have that conversation with them about, this grant just did not work and what they were going to change in the future. So absolutely, don't tell the story, just tell the truth and then make adjustments. So budgets. Interestingly enough, I went to school to not do budgets, but I do them all the time. So one of the key things that you want to make sure when you are writing your budget, and some people like to write their budget at the beginning and put their budget together first and then write to the narrative using their budget outline. Others like to work in tandem because maybe they have a department such as like the library. They have their own financial department that is working in tandem with Miranda as she's preparing the grant narrative. They're preparing the budget for the project. And then some, like probably many of you, are single solopreneur organizations, or you're the head of an organization, you're the one responsible for all of this. So whatever works for you, but here's the key part. Make sure that your budget narrative, your your narrative, your project description, and your budget all are in alignment, because they want to see that when you talk about your funding the salary of a case manager, but then they notice that you've also included a counselor and you didn't talk anything about that counselor anywhere within that description, that they're like, well, what does that mean? And maybe that person is not being funded by this specific budget, but they are an add-on or an in-kind to the budget. You want to include that and talk about that as part of your narrative so that they can see how there is continuity between all of this. And so make sure you talk about your line item, salaries, fringe benefits, travel, transportation, your supplies, equipment, facility cost, any other costs, any administrative or indirect costs, matching funds. I'll talk a little bit more about matching funds in just a second. Agency funds, what you will pay, and in-kind. And so just a little bit alluded a little bit to the in-kind costs, but make sure these are line items. So I know sometimes people like to put them all in like group one large category, but for grants, they're looking for a line item cost. So if you are funding 3 different individuals underneath your grant, you should have line items for each one of those individuals. Just don't say salaries. They want to see the salary for each position, and they want to know out of that position. So if your annual cost for a salary is $50,000, well, they also want to know how much of that $50,000 are they paying, because you can have multiple grants paying the salary for one position. And so all of those things have to be laid out when you're looking at your budget. And that is part of the budget narrative. You want to make sure that you lay that out. So during the narrative, I also like to use a format that's used by the VOCA grant, Victim of Crime Act. They want the title of the person, of the position that's being funded. So they want to know, is it the case manager? They want the name of the person who's going to be in that position. And if it's vacant, then you can put vacant. They want to know what they're going to do with the grant, or within the grant, what their role will be. How they will serve it and move it forward. So you're going to give a little description about that. Then you're going to talk about how much they are paid, whether they're part-time, full-time, contract, whether they are going to be working on the grant full-time or part-time, because they can be a full-time employee, but not full-time to that grant. And then the total amount that's going to cost them, including your fringe, your taxes, your fringe, as well as how much of that they will take. So it's a little paragraph by the time you're done writing all this information about this person. And so you do that for each line item so that they can understand how it's going to impact the grant to improve it, to make sure that it's successful. Now, then you come back to matching funds. So matching funds are essentially funds that the organization pays either in cash or in kind, depending on the funder and the grant, where you say to them, we are going to provide X number of dollars to support this project. Now, sometimes grants will have a minimum amount that you have to give them. For instance, the VOCA grant has a 20% match. And so if you're going to ask for $300,000, you have to give them 20%. Now, it's 20% of the total project, including your match. That's a whole different conversation. That's a whole different training in terms of how to calculate match. It's not, it sounds simple, but it's not. So it's not 20% of 300, which would be 60,000. It's like, okay, it's going to be 360,000, and then you calculate your 20%. But again, you have to have it. And if you do, you want to identify whether that's going to be in cash, whether that's going to be in kind, or an in-kind in this case can also be volunteer hours. So you can assess a value to the work that your volunteers do. There is a website out there, I believe we're going to share that link with you, that will give you a pay scale across the US for volunteers. Or the other thing that I like to do is I always use the measurement of how much would I have paid them to work for me. So if I'm going to hire a counselor and that counselor would have cost me $80 an hour, or their annual salary was going to be $45,000 a year, I know that's low. Those are just examples. But if that's what I was going to pay them, and instead I have a volunteer who's going to come in and do that, and I don't, I'm going to put that in kind into my grant to show that I didn't have to pay for it because someone volunteered to do it, but here's the value it brings to the grant application. So when you're looking at your budget, again, you want to make sure that all of these things are in alignment. And sometimes what happens when you're writing an application, maybe you started out with one figure and then that increased or decreased for whatever reason. Maybe there was a shift in another grant. And so you took money out of this application and put it somewhere else. Go back and read your narrative and make sure that it all still makes sense, because I can't tell you how I have done that, where I originally started out with one figure, came back and adjusted it because the client wanted to add something to it, and then I didn't go back and adjust my top number because I forgot about it. So the other thing to do, and I think Miranda's going to talk about this more later, is make sure you have someone who can proofread your documents and your materials with you.
Organizational information. So this is the section where you will discuss the history of your organization, how your organization, I mentioned nonprofit here because that's generally who Patrina and I work with, but if you're a small business, you'll talk about the history of your small business. If you're an artist, talk about your history. The organization structure, meaning do you have a board of directors? Is there an executive director? The types of programs that you do, any special expertise that sets your organization or your business or you as a person apart from others in that field, and how your organization relates to the proposal that you're submitting. So obviously this is the work that you're going to be doing, and why is that important to your organization? You can talk about the size of your staff, your board of directors. Sometimes, and this may be a separate section, but sometimes applications will ask for a list of your board of directors and where they work. And that is usually to make sure that there is no conflict of interest with anyone who's reviewing those proposals, meaning that they know someone that's on your board of directors. And generally, if they do, they'll recuse themselves from reviewing your application. It does not mean that your application won't go through, but that's usually why they ask for those, so that they can just make sure there's no conflict of interest. And then you'll talk about how maybe volunteers are a part of your project, and again, number of staff that I mentioned, and the people that you serve, or the community service that you provide. If you work for an animal rescue, or if you have a food bank or a shelter or domestic violence organization, or maybe you're a small business trying to start up a grocery in your area, or you're an artist that's looking to expand dance classes for youth. You want to talk about the audience that you're looking to serve, and why. And so this is actually a document that you can create and sort of keep on hand. I call it a living document. This particular part of your proposal can be ever changing. Anytime your board changes, someone in your staff that has a vital role in your organization, you really do want to keep this updated so that you can pretty much copy and paste this part into your proposals. If it stays updated, you don't have to go through and rewrite this every single time. It'll save you a little bit of time. Patrina, do you have anything else to add on that?
Nope, I was going to say you covered all of that.
Okay. And then the last thing is the conclusion. So with the conclusion, you always want to, wrap up exactly what it is that you're asking for, reiterate the need. You want to follow up, reiterate some of the activities that you're going to be doing, the audience that you're serving. But the biggest part of the conclusion is really to talk about that sustainability plan. And that is kind of, and Patrina, I'm sure, has stories on this too. The sustainability plan, I mean, of course, we all just want to say, well, we're going to write more grants to fund our project. But funders really want to see if this is a type of project. Is this a project that's a one-off? that will not be continuing? Or is this a project that you are going to be continuing? And in that continuation, are you looking to other funders? Are you looking at ways to maybe pull in money from the project? Maybe there's small fees for participating in the project moving forward. Maybe you've got some other collaborations in the community and they'll be contributing a portion of the budget to continue that project. So that's the sustainability plan that they're asking for. It's not just how you're sustaining your organization, but it's how are you sustaining this project moving forward, if that is on the table for it to sustain. And if it's not, if this is a one and done type of project, be honest about that. And then let them know why you would be moving into something else after this project's done. Maybe this is just a kickoff project for something that's going to be even bigger moving forward. So, Patrina, did you have anything to add on that?
With your sustainability plan, just make sure that it's clear, it's really makes sense to them. Because again, they are investors. So they want to know that the return on their investment is going to be beyond sometimes just what they're going to give you. And so if you essentially say, hey, you're going to give me this money and we're only going to be able to do this for a year because we don't have any other plans in place, chances are you may not be funded. So those are things that you want to make sure you're including, as Miranda said, beyond just what's going to happen today.
And I included the link in the, there's several different places you can go online to find what the current value for volunteer time is as you're putting your budgets together. But I did pull this one up. Independent Sector is one of the larger organizations. I think right now it says $34.75, but it can also vary by state. So when you go online, you can check out them. There's a few other sites you can go to, and make sure that you look up your specific state. It can even vary by county depending on what is being honored at that time. But your volunteer time, that is the cost of, if you were to pay a volunteer to help you, this is how much it would cost for you to hire this person to do the work of the volunteers. And so that's how you use that as an in-kind resource. So, okay, moving forward. Okay, so we're going to take a little pop quiz really fast. I put in the chat all of the 6 components of a proposal, and Patrina and I are going to pull up, well, I'll pull them up, but Patrina and I will talk about them. I'm going to stop sharing this specific screen for just a second so that I can pull up the others. We will talk about the differences in types of proposals, meaning if it's a small grant versus a large grant, like a foundation grant versus let me see if this is what I'm looking at doing. It is. Okay, let me know if you can see this, and we're not going to start with NASA. Let's start with something smaller.
Oh, see, that's why I was chuckling. I was like, NASA, that grant is going to be funny.
It's funny. Hold on a second. I gotta move that bar. That bar's in my way. Okay, we're gonna start with this one. Okay, this is a very small grant. What I want to do is show you how these 6 components are all the same, but can be listed in your grant applications under different titles. So don't be fooled. If you plan on perfecting how to write these 6 components for all of your applications, you can apply for the smallest grant or the largest grant. It's not really going to change. There may be additional information you have to provide, but it's not really going to change. So this is the Earl C. Sams Foundation. It's a very small foundation in Corpus Christi. They used to fund the Southeast Texas region, but now they're more Corpus area at this point. So they don't have an RFP per se. They do have on their website some guidelines on who they fund by region, by subject matter. They mostly fund education programs and science-based programs. So this is their application. As you can see on this first page, immediately they start asking about board of directors, your number of volunteers, your staff. Again, this is all information that you should have readily available. Put all of this in a document and keep it on your desktop as a living document that you can pull from directly anytime you have an application. But I'm moving down. I'm going to scroll down to the actual question areas. So here's this first one, this purpose of request. So this says right here, summary should not exceed this space. So immediately I know they're looking for an executive summary, right? They're calling it the purpose of request, but because again, it's a limited amount of space and they're stressing to me summary, I know that is going to be my executive summary section, okay? Move on down. Why is this program unique? Why is it needed? Again, that's your need statement, right? They're not asking for a need statement specifically, but this is exactly what that is. Question number 20, summarize the organization's history, mission, goals. That is your organization summary. Again, pulling directly from those 6 components. Going to the next one, list other organizations in the area with similar purpose, similar to yours, and describe any collaboration. So as we mentioned, a lot of grantors now are looking for collaboration because they're looking to get as much for their investment as possible. If you can include collaborations with your projects, you have some cases a higher chance of being funded, right? Because they're going to be helping more people with the investment that they're giving you than just your one organization. Although they don't say here that a collaboration is required,
right? So
it's not necessarily required, but if you have it and it's appropriate to your project, I would definitely include it. So here, how would you define and measure the success of your program? How will the project's results be used or disseminated? Plans for sustaining the program. So the first 2, this is your project description. These are your goals, your objectives. Again, they don't say project description in here at all, but how would you define and measure the success of your program? They are looking at what are your goals, what are you looking to accomplish, describe the project or the program to us, and how will you know that it was a success, basically. So this is how your evaluation is part of that project description. That is exactly what they're asking for. Number 25, describe your plans for sustaining the program. So this is your conclusion, the conclusion section of those 6 proponents of a proposal. This is the part from the conclusion section, that sustainability question that we all dread getting, but all of them are adding it to their applications now. And if seeking funding from another grantor in the future is how you plan to sustain it, be honest and let them know that we have a robust development department or development manager who is working on relationships with funders to sustain this project. Make it sound pretty, but also truthful. Be honest with them. If you're talking to other people about funding this project in the future, let them know. Do you have anything to add on that, Patrina?
So on your sustainability, just make sure that sometimes they won't ask you for a list of funders. I believe this application actually does go on to do that. But if you have a list of funders that you've sought funding from or you're going to, it's pending, make sure you include that as well so that they can see that if they don't ask directly, include that in your sustainability statement.
Yeah, the reason they're asking that is because they want to know, okay, if you're asking $5,000 from us, is that the full amount of the project, or are you asking $5,000 from someone else to complete the total budget of the project? And if so, what parts of the project are we covering and what parts are they covering? Sometimes funders are going to want to know that. So in this current state of funding, I don't know about you, Patrina, but I'm finding myself having to piece together grants to cover an entire project cost as opposed to one large funder, just because of the current state of funding. Okay, so now this was a very small foundation. I think the max grants they give are like $10,000. So we're going to move to something that's a little bit higher. This is from CenterPoint Energy Foundation. This is a corporate grant, right? So we just talked private foundation. This is a corporate foundation. So I'm going to show you with theirs. This kind of includes their guidelines on the application. Again, they don't specifically say RFP, but in their guidelines, we see here, this was for 2023, we see, and I'll make it a little bit larger. Hold on. Didn't realize how small it was. We see on here that they tell us exactly when the grant cycles are. So this is the deadline for the applications. They say that decisions will be communicated by June here. So my assumption is that projects will probably start around July for a 1-year period of performance. So I'm going to use that estimated timeline as I'm putting my budget together and my project timeline together so that they can see that my project's going to fit in with this funding cycle. If I'm applying for the second cycle, see here it says that grant decisions will be communicated by December. So projects most likely would start January 2024. So again, for a 1-year period of performance, because I know that they're only funding for 1 year, I would use that information as I put together my project description and the timeline and also my budget. So moving in, they tell me their funding priorities. I've already checked this. I know that my project matches. They mostly fund education and STEM and also workforce development, I think. So moving down, sorry, I'm scrolling through these pretty quickly. They talk about who is not eligible for funding. So you do want to make sure that you review this, because even though I'm a 501c3 and I think that I probably qualify for everything, maybe I don't qualify because they're not looking at funding libraries. They're looking at funding, you know, nonprofit school clubs or organizations or something to that effect. So I want to make sure that I actually am able to apply for this, because if not, they're going to throw out my entire application, and that's a lot of work. Okay, so moving into the actual questions. All right, theirs is pretty lengthy with all of the, they even tell you which counties. I mean, this is actually pretty thorough. They tell you which counties are covered. So you want to make sure, like, I'm in Texas, they cover Texas, but is my county covered? Oh, let me look. Harris. Okay, here we are, Harris County. I'm covered. I'm able to apply. Okay. So here's the questions. So right off the bat, again, here they are asking for staff information. And they'll also ask, sometimes they do ask about your organization's budget, your board of directors, here's your volunteers. Let's skip through all of this to the regular questions. Sorry. They used to ask a lot. I think they took a lot of this demographic stuff out because now it's more general, but they used to. Come on, where's it at? Okay, here it is. Project goals. So they project goals and measurements. So that is our project description, right? We're going to talk about the projects. Here is our evaluation plan. What is our outputs, outcomes, and how we plan to measure that? That is all from our project description. Your post-grant plan, that is our sustainability plan.
That's how we sustain it.
This particular organization likes to include their company staff in volunteerism. So this particular foundation will ask about volunteer opportunities for their staff. So if you have an opportunity in your organization for some of their staff to volunteer, that's always great to add for corporate foundation grants, because they really do like to be involved with the organizations that they are giving funding to. And I'm going to go back up here. Organization client income. Trying to see where it asks about the program. Here's your collaborations. Again, that they're asking for. Not seeing where it asks about. I'm sure it's in here some. Oh, here it is.
It was right. Yes.
Right there. Critical need. So that is your needs statement. Again, so all 6 of these primary components of a proposal can be found in every single RFP. Okay, we're going to move through these pretty fast because I know we're, this is a state grant RFP. This is from the Texas State Library and Archives Commission. This RFP is approximately 30 something pages, I think, maybe a little less. Oh, it's only 17 pages.
Say,
this
one is 17, but
yeah, the Texas reads, but I think the Text Treasures one is a little bit longer.
It's longer.
Yeah. So
Centerpoint was 30 plus though.
Yeah, they do give, you know what I like about the Centerpoint one is they do give a lot of information about like what they funded in the past. And so even though you think that might not apply to you right away, it's good to read through the whole manual because you want to see who they funded and if that matches what you're doing. And if it doesn't mean you don't necessarily qualify. You may still qualify, but why are you if you're different than others that they funded, maybe that's a bonus, you know, maybe, and you still qualify to apply. I would talk about the differences and maybe some of the other organizations they funded. Absolutely. So here is for the TSLAC, right away it talks about the needs assessment, right? So TSLAC doesn't give you an application. They have a portal that you have to open, and basically what I do is I create a Word document off of this application by headliner. So I will pull needs assessment and I will put that into a Word document and then program purpose. And I will start working in each of those sections. And then when my team and I are ready, we feel like the proposal is done, we'll copy and paste into their online portal. And I highly suggest you do that for any funder that has an online portal because, you know, technology happens, things crash. Sometimes they don't save. You don't want to be caught in a situation where you've spent all day putting information into an online portal and then your computer crashes and it's gone. I had that happen once before I learned my lesson to put everything into a Word document. I was a budding grant person and I was like, oh, this is so great. I put it in a portal. And the electricity went out in our offices and I lost everything. So don't be me. Create a Word document for every application. Plus, you can save that on your computer and use it as a template for future applications to that funder. You know, you can pull up what you sent the year before and just edit it based on the project for that year. It saves you a lot of time. So you want to do that. So what I do is I create my needs assessment. So this is my needs statement, right? Your program purpose, that is basically your project description. You're going to go through talking about all of the items that you'll be putting into that project. Program design, this is also project description. Sometimes these components can be split up into different categories, so you can kind of just add the information where it needs to be, because you'll see here timetable is on its own in theirs where it's part of the project description, but in this application it's going to be its own section. Your evaluation, which is also part of the project description component of a proposal, it's going to be its own section in this particular application. So your budget, that's its own entity here. Now they do require a budget, which I think is on a different page. It's a budget narrative. So what I do is I take each itemized item or subsection. So if it's supplies, staff, trying to think what else, rentals, and then I will create a paragraph like Patrina was saying earlier about each of those subsections and how we've calculated the amount of money that is needed for those and what it's going to be spent on. And it's just a paragraph. I mean, it's not a ton. You get a lot of information into a very small space. So, and then they kind of go into, here they talk about how the decision-making process is made. What I like about TSLAC is they actually give you a rubric on how your proposals will be scored. And I really appreciate this because I can go and look at the rubric, and then before I submit my proposal, I can kind of compare as I'm reading through mine to the rubric and kind of say, okay, I think based on what we have here, I might get maybe I'll get 2 to 3 points for this, which means I need to probably expand on this a little bit before I submit it. So it's really nice to take a look at their rubric for scoring, because this is what their reviewers are going to use to score your proposal. It really helps inform what you put into your proposal. Okay, so that's a state one. Let's talk small federal. You want me to get to NASA so fast, don't you?
No. You're good. Small federal.
Okay.
Good. We'll start there.
Now we'll see. So this one is maybe 50 pages, 43 pages. It says here. I think maybe give or take a few pages. This is for the Department of. It's IMLS is a government department. Well, we hope it will stay a government department. It's on the chopping block right now, like so many others. But this is the Institute of Museum and Library Services. It's the department of the federal government that provides funding to museums and libraries across the country for exhibits, for preservation, for collection development, for staffing, for training. It is so vital for the culture and history of this country. I don't think we're applying this year, but we in past years applied often for this particular grant. Now you're saying, Miranda, you're a librarian, you're not a museum. Well, did you know that we actually do have museum items here at the library? So we would apply for this grant to support the Gregory School. The Gregory School is our African American History Research Center. It is an old school building that does have an exhibit hall in it, and we have a lot of items, not just documents, but actual items in archives that need constant preservation. So it is a library, but it has museum components to it, so we still qualify. And so don't count yourself out just because you'll look at it and say, oh, that's a museum grant and we're a library. Well, when you get to reading into the RFP, you realize that they do fund libraries. If you have exhibit spaces, exhibit halls, regular items in a collection that are maintained as a museum, which we do. So we would apply for this grant every year to digitize some of the archival materials so that we could put them online and people could see them online rather than having to come in and request, by special permission to view these items. So that was why we applied for this. You can see where I've gone through and I've started highlighting my RFP to see when the deadlines were, when the projects could start. Right here, you'd see they had to start by July 1st. So I knew, okay, this is a 1-year grant. So if they start July 1st, we have until June 30th next year to get this done. So whatever we propose has to be done in that 1-year period of performance. Going through, so it talks about different project sizes, how much you can apply for. Again, you want to make sure you review all of this because it will inform the proposal you're putting together. Eligible applicants, that's what this is. This is where it talks about to qualify, they don't necessarily need to include the term museum, but it has an exhibit and objects for the general public. So that's how we qualified. So here I see I've got highlighted that for small projects, which is what we were applying for, the cost share is not required. A cost share is same as a match that we talked about earlier. For federal grants, you are not allowed to use matching federal grants for that cost share. You have to use something like donations or foundation grants, something that is not coming from federal money, because they consider that double dipping, meaning that you're getting federal funds for the same project from 2 different federal agencies. So it would have to be, or it could be our own money, business money put into that particular grant or proposal as a match. All right, so I'm going to skip down here. So here is where it lays out what I need to submit for their grant. Now with government grants, they have portals, but it's a little bit different. You have to save each section of the proposal as a PDF for some of these and upload those PDFs with certain naming justifications in that portal. So I'm not copy pasting information into a portal at this point. Now I have to make sure that my Word document that I am creating based on each one of these categories is a whole and complete document within itself. So I do put headers on those, usually repeating the opportunity number, like the grant number that we're applying to, our name, the project name, and exactly what that is, if it's the organizational profile or the narrative or the schedule of completion. You want to make sure that each one of those documents is its own individual submission. So going through this organizational profile right there, that's your organization information, right? That's in those 6 components of a proposal. This narrative, so for them, the narrative is both your need and your project description. Okay, they only give one document for both. So here you see it says 7 pages max. So I wouldn't submit 8, because if I submit 8 pages, they're not going to allow that. The 8th page would get tossed. So I have to do both my need statement and my project description in that one narrative. I probably would put my conclusion on that as well. I'm not going to include my organizational history because I get to put that in its own document, thank goodness, and save some pages for my narrative. And here they're asking for a schedule of completion. So that's my timeline. So I don't have to put the timeline in my narrative either. I get to save those pages for something else. Performance measurement plan. So this is, IMLS is unique in that it gives you a template. It's kind of like a rubric for your performance measurement, which is basically just your goals and your anticipated outcomes. But here they allow you to do it in a separate paper, which is great. Again, I don't have to put it in my narrative, so I get to keep that full 7 pages for my narrative to explain my project need and my project description. They have a special form you use for your itemized budget items. And then you'll see here, this budget justification is a completely separate document. So I usually take the categories of the budget form and I will create a Word document with those categories and use that for my budget justification. If I don't have any costs in some of those categories, I will just put underneath that line item in my budget justification that this cost is not applicable to this project. You know, but I put all of them in it just to show them that I've gone through the entire budget form and that I understand exactly what we're asking for. Here they ask for your key project staff or consultants to be separated out of your narrative. So it has its own form. And then you'll see here where they're asking for those resumes of those key project staff and consultants. So 2 pages each, that is all that they allow. So I usually have to tell people to just give me the basics, give me the highlights of 2 pages. And then I use Adobe to put it all into one document because I can only upload one document. I can't upload more than one. And it has to be, see here, the naming convention is resumes. That's what I put it under. Now I save all of these documents once they're submitted. I keep them in their own folder for this grantor so that, again, in the future, if we go to apply for this again, I can look at what I submitted before and see exactly how it was laid out, you know, who was involved in that, how that project was done, and then we can use that as a template to move forward to apply again. Especially if you were successful, you don't want to lose those successful applications. Okay, so this is, you can see out of 43 pages, I had, what, 1 page really that talked about exactly what I needed to submit for an application, but I had to read the whole thing, right? Because you need to know how, yeah, because they also, like TSLAC did, they also go into, as you scroll down, they describe each of the sections you need to provide, but they also give you performance measures, and they also talk about how you're going to submit any supporting documents, submission dates and times, and they go through eventually, if I were to scroll through this whole thing, how it would be scored once it's submitted. So again, it's important to read the whole RFP, even though this one was 43 plus pages. Okay, now we're going to my favorite one, NASA. This one was, what's the page number? I can't see it on my computer.
346.
346. 346 pages for this narrative.
That's a day of reading.
It took me all day. Probably a couple of days, I'll be honest. I think I read it in sections. Out of this entire RFP, there are 2 pages, and I will jump to them. There are 2 pages right here, starting on page 31 and going into 32 that tell me exactly what I need to submit for my proposal. So why would I read all 341 pages? Well, because they want, one, it's NASA. So they had very specific reporting requirements, and I needed to read through it to make sure that, one, we were going to be able to do those, because they involved monthly trainings for anyone that was working on this project. They also included requirement to attend a national conference in Washington if we were to be awarded this. So I needed to make sure that our staff could go. And it talks about how they're going to score your proposals, how your projects fit into the larger scope of the NASA mission. It also, this particular NASA grant was for educators, so it's kind of like after school programs or in school STEM programs type of project. So they also, as part of when you're awarded this, connect you to a larger system that they have in NASA for educators. And so there are, like, every couple of, I think it's like twice a month, they drop like school like activities that you can do within your schools as part of being in that cohort. They give, like, there's like a newsletter, there's like online sources. We were able to connect to like the Hubble telescope and use some videos from it in our classrooms as part of this. So you kind of want to read through it and see like, okay, I've got all of this as part of it, and if we apply. So out of 341 pages, I have this one section. So again, here it is, proposal information. This is basically your program description, and it's going to go into your overall needs statement, who is going to be responsible for your project, who your team members will be. Here's the project summary. They give me 4,000, now pay attention, characters, not words. I get 4,000 characters, which I think is like 6 pages, something like that, 5 pages.
It's a nice length. It is a nice length.
And on top of the 341 pages, you see this link here for the NASA Proposers Guide. That was an extra 48 pages on writing your proposal.
Definitely one of the things that we talked about earlier, but is probably very much so in this particular application, the one we just saw, because it will list the font size, it will list the font type, it will list the margins for your application. So make sure, the number of pages. So you see here your project description is a maximum of 15 pages. Make sure you look at all of that when you're reviewing your RFP, because if not, if you do anything outside of those guidelines, you almost at that point, unless you have a really good organization, have excluded your application. I mean, just not meeting those guidelines will be enough for them to say you are not in the you're not in the running for this. I literally just did this 2 weeks ago when I was talking about that COC application. It specifically said that you needed to submit it as a PDF. I had been waiting for the client to review it and give it back to me. And 5 minutes before it was due, I realized that I hadn't heard from anyone. And I was like, you know what? We're just going to go ahead and move forward with this. So literally, I put it into the email and I sent it. It was a LOI. I sent it over because I've been working with this client now for several years. And so I was like, you know what? We're good. I'm just going to go ahead and send it. And when I sent it and it popped up on the screen because I had CC'd everybody, I realized I'd sent it as a Word document and not as a PDF. And so I had 2 minutes left. I was literally sweating, where I came back, converted it into a PDF, and then got it out at 5:29 because it was due at 5:30. And I
Oh my
did not want it
gosh.
to have a 5:30 timestamp at all. I was like, I need it before 5:30.
Oh my
So
gosh.
within 5 minutes, I got it out the door. But that simple thing, as simple as saying, hey, you sent it in a Word document instead of PDF that we required, would have been enough to exclude them from the funding for a whole year. So that's why you have to pay attention to those things and be ready to go, because had I gone ahead and changed it into a PDF earlier, then I would not have been sweating trying to convert it and get it emailed.
Right. Yeah, and this particular one, because it's NASA, they actually give you guidelines on how to do your citations for this one. Most grantors don't. You kind of just use your best judgment on citing sources if you provide data within your proposal or any outside sources. But NASA, because it's NASA, they had a specific guideline for referencing your citations for your document. So so yeah, I did read the whole 341 pages. It was a lot. Happy to say we were awarded this one though, so that was great.
Yes.
We actually purchased a, and you guys can check it out. We have a portable astronomy dome, which is a portable observatory that organizations can check out, and our team will bring it to your organization for free. Which is pretty darn cool. So that was what this project funded. But it took us, I worked on this grant application probably 3 months, not weeks. And by the time we got it submitted, I think it was over 100 pages just with all of the attachments that we had to put in it. It was quite large. So I wanted to show you that. I know that was a lot of information, but I wanted to show you that so that you could see that though we're teaching you these 6 components, that the information really doesn't change no matter how small or large that RFP application is, right? All right.
Basics are still there.
Basics are still there. Again, community partnerships, we've mentioned this a few times, so we can skip through this pretty quickly, but look for collaborations if you can, especially if you're a really small organization. Collaborating with a larger organization can strengthen your proposal. Again, you know, the grantors want to see that they are getting the most bang for their buck. If they're investing in your organization, they want to see that they are making the biggest impact that they could make. I know a lot of independent artists will often do this, where they partner with larger organizations to get projects funded because it just strengthens the proposal. Again, and if you get a community partnership, you want to make sure that you have an MOU or some sort of agreement in writing that you can submit with that proposal to show the grantor that we have actually discussed this, we have agreed to these terms, and they will be working with us on this project. And then include that organization in your reporting. So if you are reporting back after you've been granted this, hopefully you've been granted it, include them when you are tracking stats, tracking the progress of the project. Make sure that you include them in those, in that part of the project too. You know, get the stats from them. How are they doing? What is their feedback? And make sure you include that in your reporting. Katrina, do you want to take writing tips?
So definitely make sure that anything that has to be included in your application, even as they said, the naming conventions, when they require that you use a specific format, that you do that. But other things to consider is using bold type. You can potentially underline, italics, capital letters. Don't do it all over though. Use it sparingly. Make sure that you edit and proofread your document. Make sure that it is as clear as possible. If you're using a lot of synonyms, make sure that the first time you use that synonym that you spell it all out. Not synonyms, acronym. Sorry. Acronym. Make sure you spell it all out so that way they know what you're referring to. And remember you're writing this as if this is someone who's never heard about your organization. Even if you're writing it to them for the 20th time, you're writing it as if this is your first introduction to them. And you want to make sure that they get the best introduction when you are writing your narrative to them. So make sure that it's clear, make sure that it makes sense, that everything is tied together. This is a great place for you to find someone who doesn't know or who has not actually worked on the application, because once you start working on it for a period of time, you're reading it as if you are writing it, and that may not be what's on paper. So let someone else come in and support you. My mother actually often reads my applications for me because she is a formal educational diagnostician. And so she has an idea of course, how to read through an application. And so I hand it to her and I say, please proofread this. Does it make sense? Do I have any errors in there? Anything that's not clear, highlighted, mark through it. She's a good teacher like that. She doesn't use red, but she does circle and check. And then use your headings. This is a great place where you can set it apart by emphasizing if they set it in the grant that they're looking for your case narrative, your needs statement, your program description. That's a great place to use it as a heading so that they can automatically hone in on that and go, hey, this is a section where she's going to answer all our questions about this. And so this is a great way for you to emphasize in your grant. And then this is also a place where you can use list, charts and graphs. I love it if I can, particularly if it's a federal grant and they're asking for demographic information. If I can take that and copy a chart and drop it into my narrative, that makes it so much simpler. And I probably save some words. So if I have any word limitations, if I have page limitations, sometimes that does take up space depending on how large you make your chart or graph. But sometimes it's worth it if you can save 1,000 words and put a chart in there and they can just look at the chart. And oftentimes people are visual, and so that helps actually emphasize the point that you're trying to make. And then of course, make sure you use transition phrases and words to make sure you're covering and connecting all of the ideas that you're trying to cover. If you're going to do a type or writing style that is not specified within the grant application, so the application does not indicate that you should use, Times New Roman or Arial. Those are two very common fonts for federal grants. Then use something that's easy to read. Please do not use that lovely, monoscript cursive to write your grant. It's pretty, but can they read it? And so you want to make sure that it's usable for them. So anything that's clear, usually without serifs, the little ending points on them, it's better than something with serifs. So Calibri, Times New Roman, Arial, Georgia, Tahoma are all very classic fonts that you will see. Keep it on a third grade reading level, because that way, if they can read it, if a third grader can read it, then obviously your reviewers and your funders can too. And then when you can, use white space to help break up long pieces of copy, or, this is a great place to go back, put a chart, a graph, or a list there as well.
You may be asked to provide additional information for your proposal to supporting documents. So some of these are items that I would just suggest you put a folder on your desktop and keep them on your desktop for attaching to grant applications, because you'll be using them a lot. If you do have a collaboration, again, that MOU, you want to include that in your proposal attachments. You can put together an organizational chart that lists your board of directors and, again, where they work or where they're from, because they want to check and make sure there's no conflicts of interest. Project timeline and budget, as you saw in some of those federal grants, they were their own attachments, so they were outside of the project description. So you may want to keep that as a standard grant attachment. Again, charts, graphs, logic models, your bibliography, those would be specific to the grant that you're applying to. But your key project staff, your job descriptions, that might be something that you can create and be a living document where you're updating it anytime your staff changes. I typically ask staff when I get a new manager manager on site that I know is at some point going to be involved in a grant application, I ask them to send me their resume in advance just so I have it on my computer. You'd be surprised how long it takes somebody to get back to you sometimes for something as simple as a resume. Your organization operating budget, your audits, your Form 990 that you get at the end of every year, the annual report that you put out to any of your customers or constituents. Those are also living documents that you would like to keep in that folder on your desktop so you can refer to them anytime you need them for your grant applications. And again, any photos or videos that you have of the project or the work that you're doing, I usually create like a Word document. I mean, I'm not really fancy with technology, but I'll create a Word document with certain pictures for various projects, and I'll save it as a PDF. And that way, when people are asking for photos of specific projects, I just have that kind of like overview photo document of photos from that project that I can just send them or attach to the application to kind of give them an overview of what we've done in the past, some examples. My biggest tip is just to have those handy, because you definitely, if you're on a time constraint, don't want to have to go searching around through your computer to find them. And then again, submitting your proposal, double check your grammar. If you can get some sort of, I use Grammarly on my computer. I don't use the paid version. I just use the free version only for grammar. I just use it for like spell check and for grammar style. I don't use it beyond that. We're going to talk about AI here in a second. But having something on your computer that can kind of help you with the grammar and spell check is very helpful before you submit your proposals. If you don't have that, have others read it. As Petrina was saying, her mom reviews her applications because she's got a background in that, and she's wonderful. I have staff here that I reach out to review stuff, especially if I need a second opinion on content. I'll have them look it over. As I mentioned before, save everything in your Word document on your computer. One, this will save you if you lose power or if the portal crashes. You can go back to the Word document for anything that you've written, but also you'll have it on file for next time. Provide any evidence or citations, as we stated before, and then, of course, submit early. I try to put deadlines a week ahead, sometimes a couple of weeks ahead, depending on the grant, but again, life happens. It may end up being the day of the submission, but if you can submit early and get it off your plate, please do.
Particularly grants.gov, because it will crash.
Grants.gov crashes quite readily. Okay, Petrina, let's quickly talk about AI.
So should you use AI to write your grants? So as a consultant in my own practice, I have to say that oftentimes individuals will say to me, well, why pay you to do it when I can just use any of those out there, ChatGPT, Grammarly, Perplexity, you name it. There's Gemini. There are tons of resources out there now that will allow you to do this work. And the reason why you may want to consider doing it is this. We'll look at the next slide. Drum roll.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. So speed and efficiency. You are able to generate a grant. I mean, you put in the prompt. You may even put it in the application. It's going to generate a grant within seconds. And so now you need to know, is that grant actually good enough to submit to the funder? I will tell you it's not, but we'll talk more about that as we go through. So research assistance, it can identify funding opportunities and pull relevant grant data, but make sure you check it. And then consistency and compliance, because it's already written well, but is it in your voice? So that's something else we'll talk about. It's great for idea generation. I will tell you, up until last year, even though I was fully aware and using it in other areas of my business, and as long as back to 22, I did not use it at all, ever, to write a grant. Because I was like, oh no, that is like, in my mind, creating so many issues around me, my work, my clients. So at this point, what I will do for a grant and using any of those tools is that it's just that, it's a tool. I may use it as a prompt. Usually when I'm tired at the end of a day, I've had a long day of writing, or a grant funder gives me a brand new question that literally I had not ever thought of, I will use it to generate some copy. And it's a great place for me to start, but not in my narrative, because usually I'm going to go in there and make sure it is specific to the client that I'm working with, as well as the project that we're working on, because it's very general when you're using AI. And so you want to make sure, but it does cut time. So something that might have taken me on my own an hour and a half to write, I can do it in 30 minutes with the prompt and go back. It also generates new ideas and information I need to include in there. So it is a time saver. And that is definitely something you want to consider if you're using AI in grant writing. So what are some of the cons? So it does not capture that human insight that we talked about, making sure you include as part of your narrative. Now, obviously, you can go back in and put that information into the narrative, include a paragraph, rewrite it, even ask it to capture some information around a scenario. Obviously, it's not telling an actual story for you, but you want to make sure that it does tell a correct story. Interestingly enough, I did use it to generate a presentation for me as a baseline when I just spoke at the Texas Bar Association Nonprofit Conference. And I asked it to generate some PowerPoint around grant audits. And it created a whole story around an example around an organization that had lost $250,000 in funding. I didn't put it in and say, write about this. It created it. And I was like, this is scary, because it created the narrative. I would theoretically think I'm supposed to talk about it, but what if it didn't actually happen? What if I don't know any actual examples of that? So I actually took it out, because that was a little creepy and scary for me. So you want to make sure that it is accurate information, not outdated, particularly around your stats, because sometimes it may be pulling stats from locations. ChatGPT is known for this, for pulling stats that are outdated or just incorrect. It made me worry, is it creating stats after this last presentation? It's definitely going to have a generic voice, particularly if you don't use it often, because ChatGPT builds on learning you from interactions with you. So as you ask it to modify and change voices, it then learns you and can speak more like you. So you want to make sure that you definitely personalize anything that you're using to generate, any tool that you're using to generate a narrative. Make sure you go back and put your voice in it, because while they may not know you now, if awarded, they will, and then they're going to go back and go, but she doesn't talk like that at all. And she doesn't write like that either. So they will begin to pick those pieces up. Then the other thing is over-reliance can cause an issue with plagiarism. And then, talk about originality and who owns the content. Those are all conversations that are being held in this space. And so you want to make sure that you think about originality and plagiarism, and also the information that you put in there. We're going to talk about that next, but it also struggles with complex program details or localized data. Again, it wants to make it's a large language model, and the idea around that is to make it as simple as possible. So you want to make sure that you have captured all the details of your project, and generally you're not going to get that with just using or generating a grant through any of the tools that are out there. And then the next thing is that when you put your information into the database, it is just that. It is now in that hive mind. So free accounts use your information to incorporate and use that as data to include in their database. So now that I'm thinking about it, maybe that 250K scenario was a scenario that someone else had put into something very similar, and that's what it spit out and gave back to me. But it wasn't in context for me, so therefore I didn't feel comfortable using that as part of my presentation. And so you want to make sure that you're only using information that if someone asks you a question on it, you can obviously respond to it and talk about it. Don't include confidential or proprietary data in these databases, because again, it's being collected and used as additional information for it to use when generating responses. And then while you may have a subscription a paid plan, you still want to avoid putting anything confidential, proprietary in there. I wouldn't put anything in there that you don't already have in the public domain, because it will then again absorb that information, and it may not limit it when it is again creating data or responses for your organizations or others. So just something to be careful about when you're using AI. So best practices. Use it as a starting point and not as the final draft. Make sure that you're using it to generate outlines, summaries, and initial drafts. And I will tell you, I am pleasantly surprised, because when I asked it to create my PowerPoint presentation, it not only said, I'll generate this for you, but I'll do this, and I'll do this. Do you want it? And I was like, oh, ChatGPT has accelerated in the last year and a half. So there are a lot of things that you can do with it that is amazing. Just make sure that it's all accurate. So you want to fact check and customize. And then how do you know that someone's using ChatGPT? Anyone have a guess? You can drop it in the chat. But think about it, and I'll come back to that. So make sure you add your human storytelling, incorporate real life impact stories with an emotional appeal. Now, you don't want to overdo it too much, but you do want to touch the heartstrings, because again, I'm a data person, but the idea is that in reality, anytime there is data that is being shared, you also want to have a real life story, because you want to connect the data to what's happening in real life. At the end of the day, I can serve 1,000 clients, and all of them are individuals with stories that need to be told and shared. And so I want to make sure that people are aware of that. It's not just the number, because the other thing that we tend to do is when we see numbers is we say, well, that would never be me. And so having the real life story helps them to connect and say, this could have been me, because you hear something in that story that's relatable. So make sure you ensure compliance and ethics, that it's accurate, original, and avoid plagiarism. And do you know you can self-plagiarize? So if you copy from yourself into multiple different narratives, like as a consultant, I definitely have to be careful with that, because I write for sometimes clients who are in the same space. And I want to make sure that I'm not taking something that I use for another client and plagiarizing from that document and putting it into another client's document. Every one of my clients' documents are specific to them. And so I don't want to self-plagiarize either. And then I leverage my AI for repetitive tasks, like budgeting templates, boilerplate language. This is a great place for you to create a template and then be able to modify it and use it as your starting point again, but not the end point. And for proofreading, I think Miranda shares how she uses it to be able to leverage it. So how do you know somebody is using ChatGPT or one of the others? And how funders will know is notice the emojis. ChatGPT uses a lot of emojis, which is fine when I'm creating and generating a post for social media, but maybe not so much for my grants, because I don't want my grant funder to realize that, wait a moment, she used ChatGPT to write this grant. So is this really a grant that the organization has written that is impactful, that is specific to them? Or is this just a generic document that was generated through AI and they haven't done anything to personalize it? So you definitely want to make sure that when you are modifying your documents, I would take out anything that makes it look like it's been AI generated and personalize it to the point where they can really say it's your document and not something that ChatGPT or Gemini or Grammarly created for you.
I personally have not used AI too much with mine, but I did share with Patrina that what I have used it for is in instances where the funder doesn't necessarily tell you what your word limit or character limit is, and you go to put your narrative in or your executive summary and it's too long. So I have taken that, my executive summary, and I've dumped it into ChatGPT. I take out all of our identifying information in my words, and I ask it to please reduce this to, let's say, 500 characters, whatever I've written, whatever the limit is, and it will take what I've written and it will reduce it so that I can then take that and put it into the limitation that is required by the funder. Because sometimes funders don't tell you what the limitations is, but you get on their portal and there's a limitation.
Exactly.
And maybe you're under a time constraint and you need to get that submitted. So it is very helpful for that. But just like Patrina said, don't put anything that is identifier or proprietary, because it will save it and use it for other people. So now we are actually at the questions section.
Yes.
We've got 3 minutes, but we'll stay over just a little bit and answer questions if you've got tons of questions to ask. I know this was a lot of information. I will be emailing everyone who's registered a copy of the slides as well as a copy of the recording. And also I have some additional handouts that I will send over to you to kind of help you with your grant searches. So we will be sending all of that out to you early next week, since today is Saturday. But do you have any questions? And you can come off mute if you'd like and ask. Oh, you're so welcome, Kiara. Thank you for attending.
Yes.
Betsy, yes.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. It was really helpful. My question is, for example, I have dyslexia and I struggle writing. Do you recommend using any other like tools to try to, write the grants and proofread? I know like AI can be helpful for that, but at the same time, like you said, you don't want to put proprietary information there. Are there any tools that are safer for people that have like dyslexia, that they can dictate or things like that you know of that can be helpful?
I'm trying to think offhand. Nathan might be able to answer. Do we have any dictation databases for writing for someone that might have a disability or a limitation? Nathan?
I don't know offhand. I can email you back once I do the research on that.
Okay. I know there used to
some links to you.
I appreciate it. I know there used to be this was years ago when I worked at a college in student affairs. There was a program called DragonSpeak that we used for dictation. I think that's an old program now, but there may be something similar to that. I would say in this case, like using AI to edit and or help round out your writing would not be a bad thing. I think that AI would be really helpful in that situation, as long as Patrina said, you're putting your own personal touches to it and you're not allowing the AI to write the entire thing.
And Microsoft Word actually has a transcription tool in it that you can now turn on in your basic subscription. And so you can just click on it. It will both transcribe and it will use voice to speech to type your documents. And then you can actually use that to go back and clean up your document.
Okay, thank you so much.
It's Betsy?
Yes.
So your email is betsye@bcm?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I will get that information back to you.
Oh, thank you.
Any other questions? So some of the handouts that I'm going to be sending to you guys as well, I do have a copy of a template for a logic model. So you can kind of see how a logic model is laid out and what information should be in that should a funder request it. You don't get asked for those too often, but sometimes with the bigger funders, they want them. I'm also sending you a list of resources available at the library for use that could be helpful in grant writing. It'll also have a list of places that you can sign up for newsletters to get free trainings, because occasionally certain organizations will send out free training opportunities. I would say sign up for as many of those as you can. It's a great way to sort of expand your knowledge without having to pay a ton of money for training. They tend to be basic, but if you're just getting started out, it's still very helpful. That sheet will also have a list of resources for databases for looking up stats, demographics, data, both locally and nationally, that you can include for your grants. And it'll also include, I'm also going to send some tips from GPA on writing and submitting proposals, because they have a great handout on their website for that information. Let me see, Tony, in general, is it less complicated or complex to apply for private grants versus federal grants? It's typically less complicated and complex to apply for private grants versus federal grants. Federal grants are, I don't want to say they're complicated. They just have more moving components to them. And they usually ask for information beyond what a small private foundation may require. They're more competitive generally as well, because they're national. So you have to keep in mind with federal grants, you're not just competing with local organizations applying for that opportunity, you're competing with organizations all over the country. So they may get 200 or 300 applicants for one opportunity, and they're looking to fund 20 proposals. So they typically are more competitive. I would say if you have an opportunity to choose between applying for a private funder versus a federal grant, especially right now in the current climate that we're in, always go for the private foundation. They tend to be more local than a federal grant. They may not be giving more funding out, but they may be looking more in the area where you're located and giving funding specific to those organizations versus a national scale. So I typically look towards private foundations first. Since we are a city, the library, we're a city entity. So as a city entity, we do apply for a lot of federal stuff, but it's because we're part of the city of Houston. Honestly, if we were just a small independent library, I think applying for federal grants would probably be difficult for us, because the management of them is much more difficult as well. There's a lot more reporting due for federal grants, which, you know, we may do a class on reporting at some point again in the future, but when you're dealing with federal grant, because it's federal money, you really do have to have everything in alignment for the reporting of that, because if you don't report correctly, you could get into a lot of trouble, including jail time.
Yeah, that part. I was just about to say, you could go to jail. I don't play with those grants.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So go ahead.
I have another question. You
Sure.
mentioned the logic model. Is there like a website that helps you? You know how there's like websites that help you build your resume? Is there a specific websites that help you build like a logic model?
I honestly don't know. I have a template I'm going to send to you guys, and actually, Nathan, I think I emailed it to you. I don't know if you can throw it in the chat before we get off of here. I have a template, and it does describe each section pretty well on what should go in each. It's kind of like a chart, a logic model. It's like a chart. And so what you do is you put little abbreviations about your project and your goals and your outcomes in this little chart. And it basically lays it out for the funder to see in a visual of what you're going to do, as opposed to a written version of what you're going to do. There may be some online sources for that. I will research that as well. The template that I'm going to send you is pretty thorough in the descriptions, but I do agree, if you can jump on a training for logic models. I've been working in grants for a number of years, and I've only had to do a handful of them. Although I do know some grant professionals who do them for every single proposal. They can be very helpful in identifying your project needs. Patrina may have had some experience with that too. I am still learning. I'm okay with logic models, but I am still learning them as well. They can be tricky. Patrina, do you have anything to add with that when it comes to logic models?
Logic models were created through actually it was the United Way that did them in 2006. They kind of 2005 era because investors wanted to know they were getting their ROI, not just serve. And I tell you, I hated logic models when we first started. Now I'm comfortable with them. So I would look at the United Way as a potential resource. They did a lot of trainings on this. And then if you go to GPA, there are a lot of trainers put in logic models, and there are several trainers that train on just logic models themselves, because that is a whole by itself. I train on logic models. That by itself is like, a 2-hour process, 2 hours, depending on how deep you want to go into it. So definitely look for your resources out there, and more federal grants. And when we say federal, because there's also what's called pass-through funding. So it can be at the city, the state, or the federal level. So actually the city of Houston, Harris County are both really good about requiring logic models with their grants. And so if you submit an application to them, you're probably going to submit a logic model as part of the process. And sometimes they have it within the grant itself as a template. So you're just typing into the document that they have, or you're creating a document. I did that last year a couple of times for clients because the grant that we were applying to both required logic models. So it just depends on you and your organization.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Well, we thank you all. We thank you so much for joining us today. I know we went over a little bit, but it was a lot of information. Hopefully, you were able to get some takeaways from this today. We will email everyone the recording as well as the PowerPoint and the suggested other documents that I have. I will email all of that to everybody, most likely early next week. But if you have any additional questions, you can also reach out to myself or Patrina. This is our information. We're happy to answer questions regarding, grants or writing of grants. Nathan is really wonderful with helping with research. So if you need additional research materials, you can reach out to Nathan. He can also do the one-on-one training for using the Candid platform, the foundation directory, so that you can look up funders and learn a little bit more about when they're giving and what to provide for those applications. And Nathan just put his email in the chat for everybody, so you can write that down. But if that was it, thank you all very much for coming today, and have a great rest of your Saturday.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.